I couldn't get a phone call returned, let alone sell a building. And so to that extent, I was sort of battening down my hatches and preparing for a tough year when I got a phone call out of the blue. My first wife had died. I had 2 young children with her, and I needed to be able to refocus back at home and not get distracted by international flights and late night phone calls. The chief executive called me into his office after I made an announcement in August 2007 that I believed the UK real estate market was going to collapse by 15%. And he dragged me in and said, "Why shouldn't I sack you? Last year we raised over £100 million to invest in the equities markets, in the public listed markets."
Which is a bold move.
We've seen that when markets recover, it's the public markets that recover first.
Simon, welcome to the People Property Place podcast.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm looking forward to it, but also somewhat flattered and perplexed as to why I'm here.
Well, look, I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about your career background and journey. And of course, we'll talk about Catella APAM and the business today. But before we get on to some of that good stuff, can you throw your mind back and just tell me a little bit about how and why you got into real estate in the first place?
Gosh, it's quite a long time ago, of course. We're talking about 44 years now. I had a relatively successful opportunity to get into playing sport. I was a very keen rugby player, and I had a choice of going to Reading University or to Cambridge University. And of course, the easiest course at both to get onto was the land economy course offered by both at the time. So I was always going to go to qualify as a surveyor, but the clear opportunity was to go to Cambridge and try and get into the Blues team and play some rugby. And
so you took the Cambridge opportunity. Did you get to play for the Blues?
I did only once out of the 3 years I was there. It was a very tough competition in those days, several very, very talented players, but then a lot of whom ended up in the industry as well. So back in the 80s, rugby was an amateur sport, and of course there were lots of people having to work as well as play at a very high level, and the property industry was very welcoming to that. And of course, we all started in London, working for the larger practices, having fun. In the days when all information was transferred by telephone or by face-to-face meetings, it was actually a benefit that you knew people through a different route. And so it was much easier picking the phone up to somebody in Manchester who you'd played rugby against the week before to ask him if this transaction had taken place or this value had happened. So it was seen as a useful tool as well as obviously a distraction.
You didn't make it onto being a professional player, or? The
game went professional in 1995, and I sadly had been well retired before then. So I had 10 or 11 years in what was regarded as first-class rugby. I played for Cambridge, London Irish, and for Harlequins.
How did you get into CBRE, and why CBRE?
Well, that was another story. The late, great Andrew Oakes was a partner of CBRE, or Richard Ellis as it was then known, and he would deliberately come to Cambridge in the summer term before the applications were due to go out and host a cricket match and invite all the sporting people to that cricket match and semi-encourage you to apply to Richard Ellis as opposed to the others.
So you went to Richard Ellis, got your MRICS, did your rotations?
Yeah.
And then qualified in 83 or so?
Yes, 84 I think it was, a two-year qualification, joined in September 82. Worked for the amazing but sadly late Leslie Morley, who was in charge of the valuation team and was given a wonderful task, which was to value on a monthly basis the only £500 million UK property fund, the Abbey Life Property Fund, and to take that role over from the amazing Robin Butler. And you may not remember Robin is very, very successful today. and has in effect sold Urban and Civic to the Wellcome Trust and is still an active player in the market today. But Robin was my handover person on the valuation board at Richard Ellis.
And so did you go into the valuation team once you qualified?
No, then the rotations really began after that first year of valuation. Then there was a year in the West End office leasing team, working with Stephen Hubbard, who's only just recently retired. Great deal maker, great mentor. And he moved into the investment department. And I said that was slightly naughty of him because he'd encouraged me to come into the leasing team in a marketplace where actually leasing was pretty tough. I think we're talking about 84, 85 now. And he eventually dragged me across into the investment team. And we focused on West End investment opportunities, clearly through the fact that we knew the agency and the leasing markets, the occupational markets pretty well. And of course, we enjoyed the boom of the late 80s with a lot of international investors coming into the marketplace and some very big transactions. And so probably got over promoted at Richard Ellis at that time, just as my rugby career was neatly coming to an end.
You were with Richard Ellis, CBRE, for 9 years or so before moving from being an advisor to the principal side. How did that come about and why did you want to make that move?
Well, it's very straightforward. By mid-1989, it was pretty clear to me that this bull market in the investment markets, international capital flooding into the UK was over. The pricing had got to a point and the global economy had slowed. And there was a very big ask in relation to my fee demands for 1990. I sat down with Stephen and Edward Luca, one of the senior partners at the time, and explained to them I couldn't get a phone call returned, let alone sell a building. And I think that we should buckle down for some challenges. The response was very much one of, you'll be okay, we'll get through it, don't worry, stick your head down and
classic real estate optimist.
And I felt overly optimistic. By coincidence, and then the option of moving anywhere was nil because everybody else was going to face the same challenge. I simply wasn't qualified to go and run a fund or become one of the fund managers in the Scottish Amicables or the Scottish Widows of this world. And so to that extent, I was sort of battening down my hatches and preparing for a tough year when I got a phone call out of the blue from a lovely fellow called Richard Cundall, sadly died just at the end of last year. And Richard had been asked by Morgan Grenfell to set up a property asset management business within the Morgan Grenfell asset management business. And of course, Morgan Grenfell was one of the oldest and most established merchant banks, original merchant banks in London, had a phenomenal reputation, both in the asset management business and also in corporate finance. And to that extent, it was a clean sheet, clean opportunity. He did, however, say, as soon as I arrived, he said, you do realise you know absolutely nothing about real estate, so sit in the back of the car and listen and learn, and we'll have a chat about it every evening in the pub.
You're not the first person to say that when they've moved from advisor to principal. There's a massive learning curve. Huge
learning curve. And luckily, we did 76,000 miles in the back of I was in the back of a 190E Mercedes, listening and learning and going to every site of every opportunity that we looked at. We built a business that was eventually over £1 billion of assets under management. It was the brainchild of a chap called John Partridge, who had afterwards ended up running Nuveen through the Henderson's route, and also was head of Cordia Savills and in effect Savills Investment Management for a while before he set up Cording, which he's just sold to Edmund de Rothschilds. So really clever man who had conceived, first of all, specialist unit trusts, retail, office and industrial, and really interestingly, had recognised that at the wrong stages of the cycle, in order to generate return, an enormous number of funds were taking undue risk with pension fund money. So we created what was in effect the first opportunity fund, So people could select the risk levels and the sectors they wanted to invest in. So we had retail, office and industrial funds and an opportunistic fund. And they could either delegate that responsibility to ourselves or they could pick and choose.
Which at the time
was very original. Yeah, incredibly original and with great foresight, and was one of the great success stories.
So your role within that was to effectively be transactions originator or asset manager, or kind of throw into more of a fund?
All of the above. Because we were a team light, we had very little money initially. We had to raise that money. A lot of it became part of you going out and persuading the consultants and the funds to invest alongside equity and bond managers. So it was a very integrated approach from Morgan Grenfell. You would go and sit in front of Cornwall County Council or Barking and Dagenham Council, and you would have to argue your case, explain what you were going to do, and deliver, of course. And luckily, starting in 1990, as the market did turn very rapidly against real estate, we were starting with an opportunity to buy with unleveraged capital, with an open book in all sectors and all risk profiles. And Richard was a very, very skillful investor. So ultimately, we had a good start.
So that was effectively your fund management education.
Yeah.
Under him, having been at CBRE for 9 years or so.
Yeah. And he left. So John left in '93, and Richard left in '94, and left me holding the baby. And luckily, I brought in some really good people as well. James Pettit, who's only just retired from the business all those years later. He must have done nearly 20 or 20 plus years within the Deutsche Bank, which eventually took over Morgan Grenfell. And a lovely chap called Nigel Bennett, but also some great people there. Bill Hackney, who went and followed John through Cordia Savills and Cording. Really talented individual on the operations and the client servicing side, and a tremendous group of people who went through that business. I can't name them all, but for example, Gordon Aitchison, who's still doing incredibly well at Legal & General, and of course I handed over in 2003 to Bill Hughes, who took that business onto another level as well. So and then post that, Jessica Hardman took it over and took it even further with her extraordinary input to getting it through the DWS.
GFC and challenges,
exactly.
And bringing Asian capital into the UK market. Why did you decide to leave Deutsche, and what did you go on to do?
Good question. I'd done 15 years. We just raised another fund, an opportunistic fund, about £200 million, focused on the UK. But you may remember back in 1998, 97, 98, 99, Deutsche bought Bankers Trust. And Bankers Trust was a phenomenal business, but had come across some pretty tough times through the long-term credit crisis in the States particularly. And Deutsche bought that business, and I thought at the time, Ian Marcus was at that business at the time, Richard Mully, some really wonderful UK people who I'd known through their careers and really admired. And I thought this was going to be the dream team of me, just the asset manager, being able to now put ourselves into the framework that of the capital markets that those guys were really huge in and extraordinary capable and connected. But of course, they didn't stay. Ian left for personal reasons, and Richard went on to set up a business with Richard Georgie, and the rest is history for him as well. So I ended up having to work more with the Americans in the business, and I felt there was a cultural difference between what we did at Morgan Grenfell Property Asset Management, right at the asset level, and their global ambitions to be bigger and all-conquering, and particularly focus on the private equity model. And I think there is a cultural difference. And so I decided at that time I should leave. I'd also had a personal tragedy. My first wife had died prematurely, obviously at age 45. I had 2 young children with her. And I needed to be able to refocus back at home and not get distracted by international flights and long, late night phone calls to people in far-flung places of the world. So the parochial UK business was absolutely wonderful and exactly what I felt comfortable in. The larger Deutsche Bank ambitions at that time couldn't suit me either professionally or personally.
Took some time out to focus on the family. How long did you take out?
Well, a really good question again. It actually assumed that we were going to have to spend quite a lot of time out, and we were going to have to find a way of working more flexibly, ironically, in a world that was all office-based. Today, of course, with technology and the work-from-home culture, it would have been a lot easier. But also wanted to reflect about the fact that the business that we'd built from scratch was now being consumed by, bigger and more global forces. And so whatever we were going to do next, wanted it to be small, wanted it to be manageable, and wanted it to be more suited to the culture and style that I'd really enjoyed at Morgan Grenfell.
What did you go on to do, and how did you kind of blend the personal kind of need with the professional ambition as well?
There's so much serendipity in this that there was a small announcement in the FT that I'd resigned, retired, gone home crying, whatever, and it had been picked up by my landlaw tutor from Cambridge, who was a lawyer at a law firm in Milton Keynes, and said, look, if you've got time on your hands, why don't you drive up to Milton Keynes and have a lunch and, just catch up, because I haven't seen you for 20, 30 years. We enjoyed each other's company at Cambridge, and we're a law firm and we're doing all sorts of interesting things. And that's the sort of thing you find time to do when you're not in the craziness of a full-time employment. And so off we went up to Milton Keynes. He introduced me to a young chap called William Powell. William Powell, ironically, had worked for Andrew Oakes, the fellow who had encouraged me to apply to go to Richard Ellis. So people connection. William was working for a small business called Hotbed. Hotbed was a private equity syndicated business where they had all the regulatory platform to go and raise high net worth individuals' money, and they had ambitions to go into real estate. So William and I formed Cooke and Powell, the little asset management team. We set up in London, and they raised us money, and we started investing it in small cap deals around the UK, which in 2003 was a wonderful opportunity for me to have the flexibility, use a bit of our skill, and there was a pretty suppressed marketplace. I even managed to buy a building in London right next door to the Ritz, which became our office, 4-5 Arlington Street. And we held a contract on that building for about 7 or 8 months because there was no capital out there to buy a freehold property next door to the Ritz in London, to give you some idea of the market conditions. Richard and Ian Livingston actually kindly backed me to do that transaction. Really? Yeah.
And so setting up your own business was a way where you could get the flexibility to be dad at home and deal with your personal situation, but also give you the platform.
It was domestic, and of course what you misinterpret about that is actually the hard work that has to go in, because there's no one else in the business doing the accounts or working out the tax bill or sorting out the mess. It's you. And so, there were some very long days and very long nights, but at least I wasn't international or getting on an airplane, and a lot of it could be done from home, and it could be done around picking the kids up from school or putting them to bed at night and having to do a few long hours. So, and I also had some amazing support at home, so it wasn't all down to me. And as a result, I managed to we did a great little business for a few years. But interestingly, we did I think about 140 million pounds worth of transactions. All of them went well. We managed to get some pretty good returns for some of the investors and an in and out basis over 2003, 4 and 5. But of course, by 2006, the model was broken because it was taking us too long to raise equity and debt and do a transaction when every Irishman in town had got a sort of free loan from Anglo-Irish or Bank of Ireland and was able to exchange contracts in 10 days cash because we were now in a bull marketplace. So everyone looks back and says, oh, you got your timing right. It wasn't that. We just simply couldn't invest anymore. So we sold everything.
Just because you just couldn't compete with just the wall of credit.
Well, agents were laughing at me when I was saying it's going to take me a month to exchange contracts on something. They were saying, look, these guys can do it in 5 days, so you're out. It didn't matter. It wasn't about competing on price. The market was still going up. There were still relatively sensibly priced assets, but the speed with which these new entrants could exchange and the amount of money they had to invest would put someone like us operationally out of the market.
So you thought it was time to cash your tokens, put that theory to the test and see how quickly people could.
Yeah, and I'd bought a few shares in Hotbed, the platform, which I sold to Christopher Holsworth Hunt of Peel Hunt. Got out of that, got out of the assets, and got a phone call from a friend at Close Brothers asking if I would come in and look at and see if there was a way of managing through what was a relatively complex and challenged real estate business that they'd built over the previous decade or so. So I insisted that William came with me to do that. He'd been a loyal junior partner in the Cooke and Powell empire, as it was. And so we arrived there in the middle of 2006 and were somewhat horrified by the challenge ahead of us.
Was it a case of moving to Close Brothers and thinking we can get in on this, Irish highly levered game and, we can start doing deals? Or was it a case of...
It was the opposite. It was
you turned
actually...
up and it was writing on the wall, was it?
The last thing I wanted to do was to go back into the institutional world. I'd now got a real taste of the freedom of being able to choose the assets you want to invest in, the size, the shape, the return profile, persuade investors, co-invest. That's what I wanted to be and do. The writing was on the wall because we just couldn't compete, but clearly that was a bubble that was not going to last for a very long period of time either. So battening down the hatches now. The really lovely component of this story is that at this point I have remarried to the amazing Jenny. Jenny was a teacher at the Herodian School. I lived around the corner from the Herodian School, and my two children who'd lost their mother were at the Herodian School and loved Jenny. So I got really lucky and married Jenny, who was part of the family very quickly. And we'd also planned to have another child. Now, of course, I had to earn some money. So, there was I can't just sit around and wait for the next cycle. I've got to go and do something. And Close Brothers offered me a 3-year fixed price deal, 2006 to 2009. And it sounded like a sensible thing to do.
And looking back, what timing to do it as well?
Well, I actually I got through, bless him, Colin Keogh, the chief executive, called me into his office after I made an announcement in August 2007 that I believed the UK real estate market was going to collapse by 15%. And he dragged me in and said, why shouldn't I sack you? This is ridiculous. We've got to be more confident about markets, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, no, I thought as an asset manager and investment manager, we should be honest with our investors. And we have been through the process. We've exited most of it. Actually, we've got some good stuff left, which we will continue to wind down. Anyway, he then called me up a few months later and said, I need to apologise. I think he didn't sack me because I had a 3-year fixed price deal, to be honest.
And also said, you got it wrong. It wasn't 15%, it was significantly more.
Oh, no, I then said, he was wanting to apologise to me at that point, and I said, no, now is the time to sack me because it was 45%.
Yeah, because you were so wrong.
15, so wrong, completely wrong. And so I was very lucky in that regard because that created the next step. Because I spent the last 18 months at Close Brothers fighting with lending banks who had lent against funds that were now underwater. And I recognized and persuaded many of those banks that it was better not to foreclose on us and allow us to asset manage those assets out rather than just dump them or hand them back. So there was a secondary role evolving here, which was to work through the distress and the default. And of course, that is APAM.
Exactly. And that's how the business, or that's, you kind of learned the craft, did you there? Or you saw the opportunity in terms of the market emerging?
First of all, I'd managed myself out of a job, 2009.
Because you'd exited.
Because it was a 3-year deal. It was clean the mess up, sort everything out. And there was not a chance of rebuilding the real estate business within Close Brothers. And personally, I didn't feel I had the energy to do that. So so I could either come out and try and raise some money, and tried to do that. Very difficult.
And you'd of course already had a stab at doing that with your previous business.
Exactly. And I got, and the other option was to go into another role somewhere, or it was to actually think, well, if you've been valued as an asset manager by banks, there is still a very long tail of difficult stuff out there. Wouldn't that be a perfect way of bridging the gap now until we see some form of direction of travel? So APAM was formed, and APAM stands for A Property Asset Manager. That's all we are. That's all we were. And we went to the banks. William came back from Australia. He'd gone a bit earlier, done a bit of a walkabout, married Karen, and he'd come back from Australia, and it literally was a 2-man band again.
You and William again?
We and William again, knocking on the doors of the banks. And actually, I had a breakfast this morning with the lovely Tony Edgley.
Yeah.
Tony and I had been on a rugby tour, what is called the Last Tour, Last Game. We'd actually played in 2009 in South Africa during the Lions tour. And I'd had a tough night, tough afternoon, broken a few ribs, punctured a lung, and was suffering from the anaesthetic that had been administered throughout that process. And Tony sat next to me as I'd had a bit of time out, and he said, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "I have no idea, but I like this idea of distress and default. I think it's where all the skills and all the things we've learned over the years can be deployed."
The combination of your leasing, your investment,
Exactly.
your asset management, trying to bring all of that together in a product that was fit for the market at that particular time that the banks didn't have.
Even more simple than that. It's trying not. What are you good at? And it is, I'd learned a bit of leasing, I'd learned a bit of valuation, I'd learned a bit about investment. Didn't say I'm any good at all of that or had any particular skill sets, but all of that applied to this is a bit of real estate that needs to be fixed again. How are we going to fix this to get it back to liquidity? How are we going to fix it to increase its value and make it attractive to somebody else? So it was a very bottom-up approach. And of course, the skills that Richard, Stephen Hubbard, the lovely Leslie Morley had taught me, I felt were appropriate at that time. But Tony said to me, "Have you heard of Hatfield Phillips?"
Workout.
And I said, "Well, exactly." I said, "No, I've never heard of them." He said, "Well, they're a very interesting group of people that are now having to set up a special servicing team in order to work through the CMBS loan books and the defaulting securitizations. And they're desperately in need of somebody who knows something about real estate."
Because they're financial engineers and wizards.
Bless them, they offered me a job. I said I didn't really want to work in Canary Wharf. But they became my first client.
So you and William with Hatfield Phillips, and they had a long tail, a long book. And was it a case of almost picking and choosing, or how did it work?
Them asking us, and there was many situations where we said, "Look, we're good, but we're not that good. We can't fix this problem. You're going to have to just put that in the auction or whatever it might be." It was all the low-hanging fruit. We did a very interesting and very successful deal with them called the Leadenhall Triangle, which was 5 office buildings valued at 136 million. We had agreed a deal for the incumbent asset managers to remain in place and for us to monitor and manage them. The loan was 177 million. The valuation was, as I said, 130. But there was a direction of travel to improve the value, but it was better for the incumbents to do that. At the last minute, the incumbents tried to renegotiate the deal and put themselves in a stronger position within the debt stack or the equity as such. And immediately Hatfield Phillips appointed an administrator and appointed us. And we had to find all the information, start from scratch, and work that through. And I managed to sell that, working with PwC and Allen and Overy, for substantially ahead of the loan amount, which was north of 176 million. In a complicated exercise, but it sort of put us on the map, and it gave us.
You could do what you said you could do.
It gave us an opportunity to broaden that out a bit more, and that's when we officially formed APAM and brought David Russell in from Manchester, who was a very well-connected developer by trade, successful entrepreneur himself, and had very strong connections with the banks in the Northwest particularly, and Ireland, and it gave us
that gave you deal flow, right?
Exactly.
That gave you the opportunity to get into the other banks that were faced with similar challenges, to give you just a book of work that you could build your business on.
And it wasn't just big London opportunities. It was granular. It was residential, developments. It was very granular real estate around the UK. And of course, that then attracted the private equity teams. What people don't remember is that actually US private equity hadn't really entered the UK marketplace until about 2009, 10, 11. The companies like Lone Star, Blackstone, Cerberus, Oaktree, no one had ever heard of them. And yet they were now coming in and mopping up.
The vulture funds, right?
Yeah. Well, they were called vulture funds. They were opportunistic funds. They were there to buy the difficult stuff at the lowest possible price. Of course, they also needed people to work through those assets. So we got lucky working with Patron Capital, Varde Partners. We did work with Oaktree, Cerberus. So it was fun times for us. It was just an extension of the distress and default asset management work we were doing, and now we were back with capital to go on the front foot.
It was just a different side of the coin, right?
Yeah.
And you could apply the same skill set, the workout skill set, to the more transaction investment skill set.
And I don't want to bang on about it, but we are just a property asset manager. We can apply that skill to whatever capital or whatever situation, because there is a very simple approach, which is, what can you do to this asset to make it go up in value or make it liquid again? So it's once you've posed yourself with that question, it's not let's go and buy lots of logistics or let's go and buy lots of shopping centres. It's a completely different approach. It's this is the asset, fix it, get it leased up, make it fit for purpose, make it compliant, whatever it might be. Make it liquid and make it attractive to the next investor.
You're not having to try and sell an agenda or a conviction or an idea, because you've raised that money and you need to stick through it. It's, as you said, a property asset manager. From an economics perspective, how does that relationship work with the banks or with the private equity groups? Is it just on a fee basis? Is it on a contract for a year or 5 years? Is there a performance kicker at the back end? And how do you kind of align in interests as well?
All of the above. Because each asset has a different business plan, a different direction of travel, a different opportunity, a different entry pricing, et cetera, et cetera. But you're absolutely right. What we found was we needed to layer our services. So we needed skillful people in property management, facilities management, accounting, asset management, with an integrated approach. That's the key here, is that you end up with very skillful people who are normally specialists within larger organizations becoming part of a team to drive the value of that asset. If you can drive the value of that asset, you can ask for performance fees. Often the banks were reluctant to pay us anything because they didn't have much cash flow to play with, and they were underwater. So they would incentivize us, and we took on some transactions, opportunities with them on a completely speculative basis.
Just knowing what you know, backing yourself, picking the right one, going, we can make a lot of money if we turn this one around. And, almost like a portfolio approach. If we work across 10 different assets, 2 will probably, lose money on, but the other 8 will overperform and compensate us for.
Sector and market agnostic. In other words, don't choose your assets. Don't be a selector. Be presented with the challenge and come up with the opportunity. It's a very different approach to the normally strategic fund management approach, which is we're now going towards industrial or logistics or healthcare or life sciences or residential, because that's the macro market we want to work in. And it comes back to this slightly old-fashioned approach towards real estate, which is our industry is here for a purpose. It's here to make real estate more compliant, appropriate, and sustainable for the occupier. Real estate is actually a physical connection with the investment that an occupier is making in their business. It's not, buy logistics and suddenly logistics companies will want them or build them. It's, of course, a logistic company suddenly turns up, like an Amazon. Well, if someone had said to you 10 years ago, by the way, you'll be building 1 million square feet crinkly tin sheds for an Amazon, and they're going to be spending more on the building, fitting it out, than you're ever going to spend on building it, people would have thought you were smoking something illegal. The occupier is driving everything. So if you understand what the occupier wants, very simplistically, you will be able to get your investment decision correct. And often we're now looking at obsolete real estate, which you have to reconvert to suit that occupational market.
And in terms of the skill set, it's across all sectors. The kind of the core skill set that you're talking about can apply to self-storage, BTR, care homes, office, retail.
You've got to know something. You've got to know something about the specific sector. So you've got to understand the occupational demand. So you do need people that are really good in retail and really good in logistics and really good in offices. We've always said we will do whatever it is. We're not doing it because we're not long in regional office buildings because we decided to invest that capital in regional office buildings. We're long in regional office buildings because we are sorting out the problems of the regional office markets, fixing those buildings, getting them better, getting them fit for purpose, leasing them, and now achieving record rents.
Property is a people business, hence the name People, Property, Place. Business has been tough the last couple of years. Get the people aspect wrong, business becomes impossible. Get the people aspect right, it's still hard, but it's manageable, much more enjoyable, and you're much more likely to hit your goals. So if you're looking to add top talent to your team in 2025 and you're open-minded to an alternative approach and you're keen to make business a little less hard, drop me a DM. I'd love to have a conversation with you to see how Rockborn could potentially help you with your human capital requirements. Right, let's get back to the podcast. How did you go about building the business? Is it a case of mandate to mandate, increasing the quantum of opportunities and then, building the team very deliberately and carefully to match the mandates that you want, and slowly over time, the business slowly scaled up?
Yeah, I don't think there was any very clever 5-year plan. It was eat what you kill. It was be good at what you do. We also have another phrase, which is it's not good enough just being good. You need to be doing good, and doing good can be just improving the value of something.
Having like a fiduciary mindset.
Exactly. Reducing a service charge on a building isn't something that the industry is necessarily designed to do, because the industry is paid a percentage of service charges to manage that building. But our job was to improve the value. So if we could reduce the service charge to allow the tenants to pay more rent, the value would go up. Simple stuff. So you need people that are really forensic about how to reduce a service charge. What is the price of electricity? Is there a better way of doing the security on this building? Is there technology that will help? And so you build your skill sets to meet the market as opposed to building a skill set and then saying, oh, I've got lots of people in retail. Now I need to go and buy lots of retail.
How long did the kind of the workout, distressed
Not long enough.
train go on for? A few years before it kind of flipped to being more kind of
front foot private equity. And actually then again, the interesting thing was in 2015.
Yeah, receivership.
Well, you ended up, but you ended up with a lot of the US private equity groups that were backing us had now given up on the UK. They'd seen all the fun there. Europe was far more attractive for them. And, talented people like Richard Croft, who I know has been on your program, he would follow that private equity into continental Europe and build a fabulous business, M7, as you know, and sell that on to Oxford Properties only quite recently. That was the choice. You either go with that capital and get on airplanes and really try and apply your local skill set across markets that you didn't know particularly well, or buy in local teams, as Richard did very successfully. But we didn't feel we were capable of doing that. I think probably I was at a generation where I simply didn't feel I had the energy to go and build teams on a continental basis. And of course, domestically, I wanted to be at home, spend more time with my family. So to some extent, there was a natural choice, which was, okay, if we're going to stay in the UK and there isn't opportunistic returns and our opportunistic investors aren't interested in the UK, we need to build a much more core plus business around us to sustain salaries.
And how did you make that transition, and what kind of business did you go looking for?
We got very lucky. People respected the fact that we had a slightly differentiated offer, a fully integrated, quite boutique team, and that was attractive to clients such as, for example, the Britannia Danish pension fund group that had £400 or £500 million worth of regional office buildings, and they switched to us in about 2015. And brought with them some skill, some team, a team of people as well. And that was a very strong driver in building out even more of that. We met through my contact at Close Brothers, who had employed me in the first place. We met a very successful high net worth South African investor who was looking to build a substantial business in the UK. He'd made a lot of money in Cape Town and Joburg, and he was offshoring that money through the system that was allowed out there. And so he wanted a team of people on the ground that could do everything, which meant that you had to have the property manager, the facilities manager, the asset manager, and some investment management skill as well in order to deploy that capital well. He's still one of our longest standing clients. His portfolio is now worth circa £100 million. It's grown from 3. So that we were lucky in that we were tailored already to be able to deliver that because of the workout. But actually, it was a perfectly good model to apply to Core Plus Capital to get it right.
Yeah.
And of course, we're also not an assets under management gatherer. Size and scale isn't the driver; it's performance.
For someone listening to this, why is that an important differentiator?
Well, I feel a bit like an island sometimes when I, or certainly someone who's the industry is obsessed with big. Everyone talks about we're doing a big deal. We've got a new big client. Size is a very, it's all relative anyway. Blackstone is big, right? Everybody would like to be as big as Blackstone. Very, very few will ever get there. And there's a lot of consolidation in the industry, making the bigger animals very big and very powerful and attracting the most of the capital. So I personally believe that there is a very strong role for not having that as your purpose, and that your purpose, if to be big is every morning you get out of bed, I think you're going to be disappointed. Whereas if you have a purpose to be really good and drive value, you will have a lot of longevity because the industry is less obsessed with perfecting something or doing something really, really well, rather than getting bigger around the asset class.
And by proxy of doing it really, really well, you'll be able to get your EBIT, multiple and return profile, rather than just it being a fee accumulation.
Yeah, and I think Catella coming along in 2018, which was deliberate by us to go to market and to attract a European non-represented business in the UK to leave us to get on with our model and to give us the opportunity to scale. So there was an opportunity to bring in new capital partners from abroad into the UK market to replicate what we were doing, as opposed to changing necessarily into a fund management model.
Which is often the way, isn't it? Is getting to a particular size and then transitioning into being more fund management orientated, or that's the next evolution that people tell you to go down.
You're in the people business. You will know that those are the people that get paid the very highest wages in the industry. So everyone aspires to being in
up the food chain, right?
Up the food chain. But actually, I think there is a role for just a property asset manager doing a good job at the asset level and earning their corn out of trust and loyalty. Now, this comes on to, diversification. If you're going to have that model, you've got to be nimble. You've got to be able to adapt, still using the same skill sets, but we recognized very early on we needed to develop a development management business because we were spending vast amounts of money with third-party people who were very good at development, but who were not really trusted by our clients. We were trusting them with our clients' buildings and capital. They were getting paid fees, and if it went wrong, we were getting shouted at. Yeah. So it didn't make any sense not to internalize that process.
And the Catella partnership exit, what have you, crystallized some enterprise value for you and Will for the work that you've been doing, but as you said, opened up the opportunity to bring in additional capital and then start going, how do we build a development business?
Just completed a fantastic development in Cardiff called the Gramercy Tower residential BTR scheme on behalf of Catella Residential Investment Management Funds from Europe. We would never have had that opportunity without Bankford APAM, the development management business, internalized, and obviously Catella. Yeah. So there are lots of synergies in that vision of the 2018 transaction. It also meant that David Russell could exit fully. He had been a very supportive partner, but he wanted to get out and do development again, and that was going to be conflicting with our services model.
Yeah.
And so it was the right time to change the dynamics, take a few quid off the table, and go again. And we went again, locked into 2023, and William took a decision to go to Australia. He married his Australian wife. His kids were now at an age when they had to commit to schools in the UK. So from a family decision, I think William had decided anyway that was not a bad timing to go to Australia. And he's now successfully launching businesses in Adelaide and Sydney. So he left. But I love the people. I'm very privileged to be working with some fantastic people, and actually an all-female leadership team who I think are as good as anything I've ever worked with in my life. I've got a young wife and a young child. I'm luckily healthy and fit. I enjoy what I do. So I've rolled the dice again and would hope to be working in the same environment for the next 5, 6, 7 years.
For someone who hasn't come across Catella APAM, over and above what you've just spoken about in terms of the journey and the story, can you just give us a bit of a snapshot of the businesses where it is today?
We have a relatively misunderstood business. It's a simple business. We have asset management capability across all sectors. We have property management capability across all sectors. We even have facilities management capability. We also have built a development management business in-house in an integrated way called Bankford APAM with a very talented individual called Chris Moore, who bought that business to us, and now we have 7 or 8 development managers in the team. And we also have a principal contracting business that actually does decarbonisation of office buildings, puts enormous numbers of solar panels on shopping centres, and physically delivers what we believe is the right solution for that asset, either to reduce the service charge or improve the energy efficiency or just improve its ESG and EPC credentials. We also have the investment management capability, but with all of that being integrated, we're adaptable to anyone's challenges. So, for example, we've just been successful to be through the procurement process for Places for London, the Transport for London's property business, where we've been over the last 18 months or so giving them advice as to how to reorganise their business to manage their assets well, almost in a sort of management consultancy type role. We've been very lucky to grow the business and find that there is an opportunity to, as I said, just do pure development, but that comes through being the asset manager in the first place. So we're asset managing the asset, appointed by Greater Manchester Pension Fund, for example, to deal with some of their more challenging assets, back to bank workout, back to our roots in terms of solving the problem. And in the process of that problem, dealing with a particular asset in Manchester and Salford, we asked our development management team to have a quick look at the site as well, and they're about to get planning permission for a potential 300 million gross development value scheme on that particular site, which started as a slightly obsolete office building.
Yeah, highest and best use.
Integrated, focused at the asset level. That's the business. Now, the data, the unique data we get, our data, we do over 350 lease events a year. And there are a lot bigger and more capable people doing far more than that. But I'm obsessed with analysing that data. How long is it taking us to let 10,000 square foot in Leeds? Why, even when we've got a tenant, is it taking 3.5 months on average to sign that lease? You know, which lawyers are actually quicker than the other lawyers? What is the rental level we are actually achieving with the rent-free periods and the capex and the fit out, and how much did we have to do, and how quick is it to lease a building that's not got Cat B fit out, and yet we've got one we've just done Cat B fit out on, and there's been 4 tenants begging for it in Birmingham, etc., etc. So analysing that data on a real-time basis in 2016-17 gave us a very clear indication that retailers didn't like the rental levels that they were currently paying in the retail markets, shopping centres or high streets. And this was the WH Smiths, the Boots, the Next, the staple diet of UK retail. We were seeing minus 16% on our lease renewals in rents in 2016.
Which is crazy because they're normally upwards only, right?
Exactly. At the end of the lease, they have the right to walk away. Now, either we were really bad asset managers or something was going on the ground. By 2017, it had worsened. By 2018, we'd sold out of all our retail portfolios for Varde partners. And like a fool, I stood outside Selfridges and announced to the world that 200 shopping centres would default on their loans, and rebuilt the business to take on the default, distress again, that was going to come through the retail markets. We ended up actually managing out 22 shopping centres through the failure of Into, etc., etc. So on one sense, it looked like a good call, and we had a very successful COVID because of that strength of team we built around Tony Christie, who's only just recently retired from the business, who was the lead retail and leisure fund manager at Aviva. And we managed to persuade him to come in to build this team to be able to deal with this default. But we wouldn't be sat here now if I'd shorted Hammerson. It took the public markets another 2 years to recognise that retailers weren't going to pay those rents anymore. And it took another 18 months for Into to go bust. Into didn't go bust until the middle of 2020. So the biggest mistake I made, financial and probably from a judgment call perspective, was not shorting Hammerson, or not finding somebody who had the capability to short Hammerson. So more recently, we've gone out to the marketplace, and last year we raised over £100 million to invest in the equities markets, in the public listed markets.
Which is a bold move.
Bold, or is it just about history? We've seen that when markets recover, it's the public markets that recover first. Where else can you invest within 3 months over £100 million and get exposure to 11,000 residential units, 100 central London best-in-class office buildings, etc., 600 healthcare facilities? We got that money in 3 months into conviction investment markets with really good companies who are trading at a 30% discount to their NAVs. Didn't seem particularly bold to us. Looked like a very opportunistic opportunity to actually say to people who wanted to invest money in the real estate markets, rather than give that money to a fund manager who might struggle to get that money into the market for some time. And if he does, you've got to judge him to get it right at an asset level. You could give us that money, and through our bottom-up approach to analysis, we could pick you some of the very best managed, well-established companies in the marketplace with really good portfolios that were just being discounted for all the wrong reasons.
So is that a case of you've got some quantitative and qualitative analysis, but also you go and physically see the assets and see the portfolios, and put the hard yards in, get in the back of the car, as you said earlier,
We're just an asset manager, exactly.
70,000 miles.
It's the same job.
And go and kick the tyres and then make that. Yeah.
It's not very difficult to go and see Great Portland Estates or Derwent London's properties and go and they're very willing to give you a tour, and they're very willing to explain their business plan. And really high quality management teams can talk about their business and demonstrate the reason why it's undervalued. KKR are now buying or are putting in a bid.
Re.
No, Blackstone today on Warehouse, fifth opportunity, asking for not only putting a small increase in their offer on the table, but asking to also take the current dividend or the next dividend that's due to be paid to shareholders on a look-back basis, which I think is quite unusual. That's if you were buying a property, you wouldn't ask the vendor to give you the last year's rent. Anyway, that's an aside. But Assura and KKR, great story. Yeah. That's happening now. It took Assura 20 years to build a business, to get 600 healthcare facilities in the UK, to have all those amazing discussions and contracts with the government about providing these healthcare, to build the infrastructure of that, to build the company around that. KKR are paying asset value. They're not buying the 20 years of unique DNA that's been built up through that management team to build that business. And so good luck. We think it's a great deal for KKR. Luckily, we bought Assura beforehand.
Yeah,
I should just say, actually, you're about to remind me. Should just say anything I say can't be interpreted as financial advice.
Yeah.
Anybody listening out there, please don't follow my advice in relation to public markets. Please make your own opinion. Yeah.
I was going to say, because there has been a lot of consolidation in the listed space, and as you kind of alluded to, getting in and ahead of that curve, there's potential to make very good return or alpha with off the back of the time and place in some of these big US PE businesses looking to kind of take some of these funds private as well.
There's been too much proliferation of public companies who haven't been able to scale, haven't been able to raise any. The reason why they were listed REITs was they were looking to raise more capital to obviously deliver more income return for their investors, and the markets have gone against them. And therefore, you're absolutely right. They're not fit for purpose in terms of size, and some of them have got difficult portfolios of assets, but some don't. Some have got very skillful management teams and very good assets, and it's those that will likely consolidate or come out the other side of this in some other format. So we're on the road at the moment, raising our second fund for a more activist approach.
What advice would you give to those earlier on in the kind of real estate journey?
I think the first one is, if you're not enjoying it because you don't understand the physical environment, you don't get out on that road and do your mileage and see buildings and realize there is a purpose behind them, there's a reason why they're there, there's a need for them to be looked after and managed, and all the necessary detail of that, including your landlord and tenant. If you don't really get that, then there are much more interesting or scalable asset classes you probably are better equipped for. So it's much more, it's less homogenous than most other asset classes, and that non-homogeneity is its fascination. A building we're sitting in now could be worth a lot more money perhaps as a residential building, or as a hotel, or as a retail opportunity, or as something else that the world of technology delivers in the future.
At a moment in time.
At a moment in time, and be reactive to that or anticipatory of it as best you can, and have the skills to then fix it, is better than just simply guessing that logistics is going to continue to be the favoured asset class.
How have you had such tremendous longevity and energy and love of this industry?
I think it's the people. I think your podcast, and I take my hat off to you because I think it is one of the very best out there. There's lots of these out there, but you really do deliver this in a much more interesting manner, in my opinion. It's about the people, and it's called People Property Podcast, which is exactly Places. It's
People
about
Property Place podcast.
Places, there you go. Sorry.
You did better than most, but you're right to start with the people aspect.
People. This is a very much an interactive human connection team business. You can't just sit there in front of a screen and get it right and be a hero. Which you can in equities and bonds. In property, you need a team of people. You need people that can understand what the capex is going to be, what the fit out's going to look like, what the best size or shape of a floor is, what the demand supply dynamics are looking like at that particular moment in time. You have to work in a team environment. And I think I'm very lucky, having grown up as a journeyman rugby player, that, I knew that I was never going to be the star of the show, so I needed great people around me to do this and that, and my job was this within that team. Recognizing your place within a team and being able to get those other team players to believe in the purpose, I think is it's a great industry for that.
As we look forward, what is the plan for you and the wider Catella APAM team?
More of the same. I would like to be even more innovative. As I mentioned, we'd like to raise the second fund in the equities market, bringing asset management and understanding of assets into the slightly more technical world of the equities markets. We would like to continue our journey of expanding our skill sets in relation to certainly the energy efficiency of buildings, the decarbonisation of office buildings, absolutely at the centre of what we're doing at the moment. Achieving value add through that process by getting a building to extend its life, or being able to make a judgment that it doesn't have a future as an office building, but it may have a future as a residential building or a hospital or something equally more important to society. I think that's the driver, is you've got to believe that you're doing some good on the way. And if that gets you out of bed in the morning, then you're a very lucky person, because you have something more purposeful than perhaps making money or being big.
Simon, a question that I ask everyone who comes on the podcast as we draw this to a close is, if I gave you £500 million worth of capital, who are the people, what property, and which place would you look to deploy that capital?
Wow. Big sum of money in a really tricky and difficult marketplace. As we discussed, though, I think I'd divide it probably into thirds. So the first third I'd like to put into the equity strategy that we've been talking about, where we raised our first fund at the end of last year. I think there's still a significant amount of opportunity to actually do a good job on behalf of shareholders there and drive a bit of change. So that would be number one. Number two, I think in this environment, you talk about people. I think there's a really big opportunity for what I call special situations. I think as the bigger capital partners focus very much on strategic and sector investment, there is a lot of neglected real estate that's perfectly fit for purpose or can be fit for purpose in other sectors. And I would work with some of the great people that you've had on this podcast, experienced investors like the Nick Leslaus of this world or the Richard Crofts, who have been trusted to deliver value in any cycle. And I think that there's a real opportunity to put some money behind those sorts of people with our asset management skills, delivering and restoring value back at the asset level. And third, I think this is the most important component. I'd put a third of that money into what I call social impact. I think the property industry has for some time forgotten its original purpose, its real purpose. The property industry is focused on making money from the asset class as opposed to actually delivering what the property industry is designed for. The property industry is designed to deliver places where people can actually function in their daily lives, whether that's work, rest, or play. And we've got to bear that in mind. If we do that well, and we do it to the standards that's required by the modern occupier, whether that's an individual or whether that's a business, then we're doing a good job for the sustainability of the people on this planet, extending our survival on this planet, which in the current environment, we're questioning how some of the leaders of the Western world are looking at their impact and what they're doing for the world. And that brings me on to, I'll never get away with doing a podcast without mentioning the brilliant Mrs. Cooke. Jenny has a business which is focused on creating films for young people about the world, which are virtual field trips. It's a business called Odyssey. It's absolutely extraordinary and it's award-winning. But more importantly, on the back of that, we've created the 2041 charity. The 2041 school charity has produced 14 films for primary school age children about the Antarctic. And the Antarctic is one of the most important continents on the planet for our survival, if we keep it protected for peace and science. And of course, again, with visitations to places like Greenland by very important politicians around the world, it has never been under more threat. And 2041 is the date when the treaty that protects Antarctica comes up for debate, renewal, discussion. And of course, the children of the world will be the decision makers of the future. So we've felt it really important, in order to ensure that we protect Antarctica for peace and science, that we educate for free the young children of the world about the Antarctic continent, because if they love it, they will protect it.
So some social value, equities, and then
education
and allocation to seasoned professionals who've been able to deliver through cycles. Simon, you've had a fascinating background, career, and I really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable about the personal challenges, but also the personal opportunities that you've taken, run with, and business that you have grown. So thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a little bit about your background and experience.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope it's been interesting.
Hey, quick one from me. If you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favor and share it with a friend or colleague that you think would get value from this conversation. It would mean the world and help grow the People Property Place podcast. Thank you so much.